It's going to be very interactive. We're going to look at a lot of code. I'm not going to like present anything like half or fully baked because it's not fully baked. This is all exploratory. We started this effort, what, 3 months ago in earnest? There's this history that I will go through. But I'm going to present to you what Zest is, and I'm going to advocate very heavily that you should never use it. Well, maybe not never, but certainly not today, because it is not for you, it is for me and my needs, and it is in flux, and it is not ready to make you a productive developer in Zest, because that's not the point. What it is an example of what you could do on your own in something for you and your workflows or your teams or whatever else. So with that in mind, just don't take anything that I say as like, this is the way, because that is the opposite of the point of this talk, which is maybe the ways that we've been doing things could be questioned more. So with that in mind, let's begin. I am an old man. I don't know if you know this, but this is my adult son. So I am plenty old. But I have been doing dev for probably just under 30 years now, professionally. I have done, let's see, what can I do? I have done GUI apps in more frameworks than most people can name. One of those things is VB6. I don't know if any of you have experienced VB of any kind, but VB6 back in the 90s was, it was awesome. It was great. I built apps that tortured my mother on our family PC, and then I got paid money to do stuff. All of these, this is not the limit of things that I've used, it is the limit of things that I have been paid real American dollars to do. I am professional in this list. And not other lists. So Win32 API, I don't know if you have ever had the privilege of using a raw Win32 API in C or C++, but there's a lot of pointers and message passing and stuff. GTK, always popular, also known as GTK Plus in some of the scenes. WX Widgets, although at the time that I did it, it was WX Windows, and then Microsoft forced them to change their name. Qt, I started with 3. I've done 4 and 5 as well. MFC, it was like, imagine that Microsoft was like, man, this raw Win32 thing is pretty hard. Let's make it harder. And everybody just was like, yes, please. It's a bit like React in that way, you know? WinForms for .NET, back in the early 2000s, this was the way to do both rich apps and web apps. And then XAML for like future .NET. XAML is wonderful. I highly recommend experimenting with it and trying it out. You can do it even on Linux. It's in the .NET ethos. Maui's kind of based on it, etc. You can still play with it and not have to be like a Microsoft fanboy. And then raw frame buffer, because video games often require that you do your own bit blasting on a frame buffer. Web. I have done the web. I started a page in GeoCities when I was 14, and we've kind of moved on from there, but I've done it in just raw browser APIs in the early 2000s when JavaScript didn't do anything, and then after XML HTTP request came out on the scene, and I'm going through this history very deliberately because it's very important. That sucked, like, terribly, and trying to build like cross-browser compatibility was a nightmare because these were not standards. They were just things that Mozilla and or Microsoft decided to make up. And we had to deal with them. jQuery, kind of, what?
You know about NeoCities?
Yes.
I sent it to him the other day.
He literally sent it to me like 2 days ago. I have done jQuery, which kind of unified, like jQuery's entire point was, hey, these multiple APIs that you have to write kind of suck. Why don't we just wrap them in functions that you can do stuff with? And it kind of informed the web standards that like made jQuery irrelevant because it's all baked into every browser now. And then I've done, React, AngularJS, Angular, Vue, Ember, Svelte now, recently. I haven't done Solid, but I am familiar with it. I've done a Hello World. I haven't been paid for doing it. So it doesn't count, but, So, no, back. So, the idea that started this whole thing in January was I was trying to figure out what framework we should use for some of the products that we were trying to build in our consultancy. And we were not happy with React. We haven't been happy with React for about 6 years now. And we're definitely not happy with the AngularJS scene because it died. Vue is okay, but now everything's like moving to server-side rendered, half-assed frameworks. I don't know how to reconcile Next.js versus Remix versus everything else based on React versus everything based on Angular versus SvelteKit and all. So we looked at them and we were like, okay, when we're evaluating these, what pain are they saving us from? Because that should be the actual goal, not which one do I like the most, which is solving a problem that I will have if I don't use it. And so we did a POC. And that POC started with these docs. These are our docs. I don't know if you know this, but the W3C has this big spec. And if you want to not read 86 pages of things that are confusing, you can read the distilled version at developer.mozilla.org. I don't know if you've ever been there. You should have if you've ever done anything with JavaScript. It's great. It's very accessible, very easy to read, very easy to find things. That was all the docs that we had. That was all the docs we could use. And that's all the docs I will ever produce for this POC. But I will show you the code that I also produced. So, code time. This is very difficult to do when I have to look at that screen instead of this one. So, this was the POC. I did it in TypeScript. I didn't have a build chain tool, so I was just evaluating what is the least... yes. Control-Shift+.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. Again, conversation. You can feel free to interrupt and ask questions about the current topic or whatever as well. I chose TypeScript because it was all the rage, and it was like, no, you got to have type safety, blah, blah, blah. And then I chose Vite for the or rollup and ES build for the tool chain, and I used some other bespoke nonsense. I did not use Vite. Sorry. We will get to Vite in a minute. And then I wrote a bash script that I will show you, and we'll actually bring this up. I normally do this in Vim, but for you, because navigating with the mouse is much easier to explore code in VS Code, you are now subjected to this. Okay, so you can see that we have all of this stuff. It's just a source directory with a node modules and a dist, and then we have this static for the HTML and the images and stuff. Should be pretty straightforward to anybody that's worked with a web app. I hope it's not confusing. If it is, I don't know what to tell you. And then we have tests because I wanted to test workflow because I'm not insane. And you run it with this run dev. And all that does is npm build and npm serve after copying the static stuff over to dist. So it's not very sophisticated, and that's kind of the point. I just wanted to do something that worked because it's a POC. I don't want to put this in production. I'm not going to put this bash script on a Docker container in Kubernetes. It's just insane. But you can see what I'm kind of going for here. And so that's how you run it, and we will run it in a moment. This is the entire app. We are importing some stuff, figuring out what to import. I learned about all the different module systems and how Node's moving to ESM modules, but nobody else is, but everybody is, but nobody is. And everybody hates each other for what they're doing or not doing. So that kind of added to my angst about all this, but you know, your mileage may vary. Maybe you haven't experienced that. Maybe you're still on old Node or something. I don't know. But we're just importing pages and some components, and we will talk about those components because they are very important to this, because they are not anything special. They are just there. They're just normal, what some people would call web components, but that's an overloaded term, and the actual term is custom elements. But you can call them web components, I don't care. Everybody will understand what you mean as long as you're not speaking to someone who's used like lit or anything else web component-y. So let's talk about this. We have templates, template strings, always everybody's favorite. This is one of the pain points that we are trying to figure out. One of the goals of this POC was, can I hand HTML to like a designer, a web designer, separate from my workflow? Can I hand CSS to a separate designer who is like a specialist at CSS? In point of fact, this is all just me or Hinton. But if we ever grew the team, having specialization would kind of increase the workflow, but we want it to work with standard tools. We don't want to have like a bespoke thing. You want to use Dreamweaver? I don't know why you would, but you do you, whatever.
Does it still exist?
I was gonna say, I know I've seen things where people can export like components from like Figma or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with styles and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just imagining this.
So for us, as long as those are like separated, we're good. We can manage a workflow of like they can check out Git and edit the files right in whatever their favorite editor, tool, whatever is. And as long as they're following standards, we don't care. If they do this in Microsoft front page, we just fire them. It's fine. And so we just have normal HTML templates. If you're not familiar with template strings, ask your mom. You know, the base component we'll get to is just a wrapper around a custom element or an HTML element, I guess. And we just do a few of those, and then you'll notice these like render, because I figured that was straightforward. So I just kind of went with that as a convention. There's nothing required there. We'll get to the lifecycle hooks. more components, and then the only thing you need to use them as normal HTML elements is this function call. Pass in the class and the tag name you want to use, and then your browser will take the HTML element and render that element when it is called. So, sorry. I'm hovering over. I apologize.
There we go.
The only caveat to this, if you're trying it on your own, is it must have a dash. You cannot have like a tag named something that doesn't have a dash.
No camel case, basically.
Yeah, none of that. It's all HTML, so casing doesn't matter. But it is literally just HTML tags, and we will show that in the browser later, which is kind of important and really cool. So that's the entirety of the app. We've registered the components, and then we just put them on the page. If you want to see the actual HTML, that is down here. Oh, that's in static, but I'll show you the dist version. Behold, this style tag is the biggest thing in here. We'll just skip right past that in the templates. And then there's a body HTML. So you have some template tags, and then a hello app. Note that I don't have a div with like an ID on it. It's literally just hello app. Please render my app. And I didn't need a specific library for this. This is literally because of that custom element define call. This is really killing my neck. It's really weird. I feel old. So, let's talk about the component base, because that's kind of important. This is the only web component. And the only four things, I'm only going to talk about three, but there are four, that you ever need to actually define in a custom element is you need to, beyond extending the HTML element here, you need to have a constructor, and you should always call super in your constructors. I don't know if you know this, but classes in JavaScript are just wrappers around prototype nonsense, so it's just sugar. You could do it the weird way, but just use the class keyword. It's fine. You'll live. And then there is observed attributes is a thing that you define, and it's the thing that says when a thing changes in the HTML attribute, does a property need to be updated? You have to write that code yourself. Sometimes. Most of the time. There are some things that come with just the base HTML element, like name or ID. I think it's ID. Those will be translated back and forth. So anytime you update the property, the attribute will be updated. Anytime you update the attribute, the property will be updated. But everything else is up to you to define the code of how to do that. That's really easy to do. Don't change my code just because I clicked. I had this attribute change callback that it calls, and it's great. And then I just called post attribute change because I figure like having that as a base class for other components to just kind of extend, like, oh, I need to do something after the component attributes have been updated. It's just nice, right? Again, all of these are just nice for me. If they're not nice for you, don't do it that way. It's up to you. This is a choose your own adventure. And then they have shadow components.
Yes.
Does anybody know what shadow components are?
They're the ones that Raj Al Ghul uses.
Yes, obviously. So there are three kinds of custom elements. There's the normal one, which are just like HTML elements that call a class. And then there are two different versions of Shadow DOM. One is open, one is closed. The difference, I will let you dive into that. What the Shadow DOM does, and it is not the Shadow DOM like anything you've heard from any framework before. What the Shadow DOM does is create an entire HTML DOM inside the component that is completely isolated from every other component. So inside the component, you can add styles that only reference inside the component, and none of that will bleed out. So you just have scoped styles and scoped behavior in your own DOM. And that is not referenceable outside the component, and anything referenced in here doesn't reference things outside of itself. There are ways to kind of hack around that, but it's really cool if you want to like one of the things that we're trying to do, but is kind of a back burner project, so it's been in the works for like 4 months. I want a final date time picker, because every framework has a way to do a date time picker, and there are a dozen libraries that will provide one for you, and they are not portable, and they don't work outside of that framework.
Did you know the browser has one?
No, it doesn't. Some browsers have parts of one.
As a date, but not a date.
As far as I know, all browsers as of like 2 years ago have one, but go
on. Fun fact, there's also the color picker that you can have, but only in Safari. If you're not on Safari, So there's all sorts of that like stuff, and if it's in a shadow component, I can literally just put it in the HTML as if it was just like part of the browser, and as long as I have that one line in my JavaScript somewhere, it will link up and behave like a normal element. And that's cool, and it will carry the styling. So like whatever your app looks like, the date picker will look and behave the same. The tooltip will look the same. Pop-ups, whatever else will look and behave the same.
So the Shadow DOM, so outside CSS will style stuff inside your shadow stuff.
In your Shadow DOM, you have to have the style in the DOM. Just like you have to have your style sheet in your normal HTML document.
So you just import it?
You have to have it in its template, you know.
Okay.
So like,
So you get like code duplication there, or
I mean, if you want, it's kind of up to you. This is the nice thing and the awful thing. All of this is you can choose your way to work and your workflow that works for you and your team and your tool chains and whatever else. And also you have to choose your way to work, because there's nobody forcing this is the React way. And if you want to like integrate this in some other way, no. You just have to build it once though, and then it works forever. That's the other advantage is this will work in every browser for as long as browsers don't deprecate this keyword, which only one JavaScript keyword has ever been deprecated. As far as language features. Browser API is different, but language keywords, nah. And I don't see them deprecating this browser API. They will probably extend it and change it and fix bugs or whatever, but this is like, I can write this once and I will use it everywhere and I will never have to revisit unless I need to change that behavior or look and feel.
But wait, this sounds like it's as easy as it was back in the jQuery days.
Yeah, we'll get there. I have way more spicy takes on this. What?
Can shadow components be nested? Like, can they be above or below others, or are they always horizontally separate?
So as far as the DOM goes in like your HTML document, like the parent DOM, I guess.
More referring to the CSS logic that justifies their existence. Like, can they pass their CSS to another shadow DOM that's more shadowy inside the first shadow DOM? Or?
You can have components inside components that have shadow DOMs themselves.
Like, you can pass CSS either up or down, right?
There's a lot of ambiguity in your question.
Okay.
So yes and no, depending on your workflow and the decisions you've made about your components and how you
So you
If
inject
I don't
them.
do anything hacky, then I have my CSS classes defined inside my shadow DOM.
Uh-huh.
And maybe I want to apply those to some other stuff that has its own shadow DOM.
Uh-huh.
It's like a child of that shadow, the first shadow DOM.
It will have to somehow, either the component has to reach to its parent and get it, or you have to provide that as a template or string or something to the child component. Just the same as a normal HTML document. Like, you have to put it somewhere, and it has to be accessible to the thing.
Okay. So if these elements can grab CSS, if they can inherit CSS as they normally would, even reaching elements that are outside of their shadow DOM,
I will show you in the developer tools like what it looks like, and then we can ask questions in a more informed manner and have a discussion. It'll be great.
it's reasonable.
So this is just how you do that, and you'll note that I didn't want to reduplicate code, so I just inherited from the base component and added a shadow root. Done. So not very hard, but Todd, components are so just one part of a web app. I need other things like a router and eventing and data management and things. I have you covered. So this is the router that I wrote because, again, the whole point was what do frameworks save me from? I wrote this in about an hour. It's not pretty. I'm not claiming any of this code that I'm going to show you is pretty. As a matter of fact, it's abysmal. We're actively working on, well, not the POC, but we're actively working on the other code that I will show you. And it will improve. But right now we're kind of hacking it together and seeing what works. And we have some problems that I will discuss. One of them being templating of both style sheets and HTML. But this is a router, and it will capture events from the browser. So it uses the history API, so you never reload. You click on a link, it reloads this page. It's a real SPA that doesn't like re-render anything except what it needs to. It's incredibly quick, and we did some other things that I'll talk about, like an eventing that in just a moment. But the router was super easy to build, and it's not very sophisticated, so I'm not like piecing together like, well, okay, a route with a sub-route with like, oh, I need to have a router within the router or whatever to render a page inside a page. You can do that if you want, I don't care. But for the POC, it didn't matter. And for our app, it doesn't really matter right now either. So we'll get to there, but yeah. But events. So remember how I listed a whole bunch of like useless nonsense that I've done in my career? In every single one, all of those frameworks, all of the GUI apps that I've ever done are event-based. Because that is how you make an app on a computer. You kind of need to, except the web. In the web, for some reason, we forgot 40 years of computing, and we just invented new problems for ourselves. I did not want that. I wanted to go back to, can I have nice things in the browser? And it turns out the browser has a custom events API, and has for a very long time. I didn't know how far we could push that, So I made, and I'll actually just run this now because it's about that time, and we will see if it works. I don't think it will, but run dev. Please do the thing. Doot. No. Yeah. Sad day. npm run dev. The demo gods are not with us. Again, I ended this in. I haven't touched it since March. And I tried to get it kind of updated, but I didn't really know what I was doing, so I didn't. But that aside, I did build a manually built table. So it's not like pre-rendered. I'm literally like doing custom or window.create element div, and then inside that create element table, inside that create element table header, like all the things, slowly, painstakingly. And I do that based on like another component. So there's a component where I say how many fields, how many rows do you want, and another component that says how many total fields do you want, and of that, how many of those do you want them to be strings? And I randomly generate strings and/or numbers for every single cell. And I have set that to 200,000, and it will take a few seconds, but it will then render the whole thing. And most of that problem is like actually displaying the table. So it's like all in browser land, not in JavaScript land, which is a nice place to be. In addition to that, we spun up the events and said, how many events can we actually do? And it turns out that you can register 100,000 events really easy. And it will take some of your memory, don't get me wrong, but nowhere near as much as Slack. And you can then fire an event that talks to all 100,000 of the handlers of that. And the registering of those events will take, on this gutless laptop, it will take 23 seconds, give or take a few milliseconds. And then the actual firing of the event and having like all of those functions do something, and they're all async or whatever. I don't know how the browser does it, but it's certainly not in my control. All of that will render in less than a second. All of those events will be handled instantaneously. Probably because it's in the browser and it's in C, and I've tested this in Chrome and Firefox, and it's about the same. That's pretty dang powerful. I don't know of a web framework that can do that. I remember AngularJS kind of stopped at 1,500 watchers on like the dual binding stuff that they did for variables. That's not much. I have a lot of things that do a lot more than 1,500 watchers. So aside from the blank screen that is very disappointing.
So, question.
Mm-hmm.
So, typically, the way it's done is you would just register one event handler, unless it's a form submit, because those need their own.
Mm-hmm.
And then you let it bubble up, and you catch it, and it will have the target in it. And then you can figure out where the event came from there.
Okay.
So, are you suggesting to actually register event handlers on every single element individually rather than having a global handler and then checking the target?
No. I'm suggesting that you do what makes sense for your application and that the browser can handle a hell of a lot of things.
Yes, but what was the use case you just described?
How can I scale? How many events can I have handling at once in a reasonable time frame without crashing the browser or something? Okay. Can the app still run while doing 100,000 events?
So you registered 100,000 events, and that took
like 23 seconds.
23 seconds, and then you fired off an event on all 100,000, and that took
of those handlers
a second. But that didn't make any changes, or it did?
Oh, it did. It changed a global variable count.
But did it do anything to the DOM? Did it do anything that would have caused the page to make a change?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
So the POC was a grand success. It was like, man, this is nice. It was easy. I'm sure that there will be problems, and indeed there are, but I don't see what the pain that these frameworks are solving for me are. Because, and I remember this distinctly, there was a time where jQuery solved a lot of pain for you. And then there was a time where jQuery didn't solve any pain for you because all the useful bits of jQuery were built into the browser. And that was probably around 2008-ish, 2009, somewhere in there. Maybe a little later.
I think it was later than that.
2012?
I think it was closer to 2015, but yeah.
A debate for another time. I could be totally wrong.
It depends on how much you count, because it went in
True.
stages, right? There was like DOM level 2 and DOM level 3 and DOM level 4.7 or whatever.
And the W3C is not exactly fast at adding these things.
And the CSS selectors were a different standard apart from the DOM standards.
Yep.
So there was like several standards over several years.
Yeah. And I'm not advocating you don't use jQuery or anything, like whatever makes you happy. I'm just saying that the things that jQuery solves for you are far, far less than when it started. And come to find out, the same is true of the other frameworks right now. So that's it for this one. This was the POC. Does anybody have questions about the POC before we move on to the actual Zest library that I started writing after this?
Well, one thought. It seems like one of the things that frameworks maybe solve is that they abstract a lot of the small details of like web specs and stuff.
Mhm.
A lot of people just aren't familiar with. There's like MDN docs and things, but I feel like there's a lot more educational resources around, whatever framework of choice than there are around like HTML standards and Web API standards. That if you don't have that basic knowledge, it would be very difficult to build something like this yourself. Whereas somebody who's coming from kind of like a knowledge sparse background could jump into, say, React or something, maybe a lot easier because there's maybe more resources to get them started.
Maybe. I would debate that both ways for a while.
Write bad code so much faster.
Yes.
I will come back to that because it is related to a point that I have more towards the end of this when everybody has kind of the same foundation for that discussion. But yes. Okay. Let's move on to the custom element lifecycle. This is the entire document. These are the 4 things. We have the connected, disconnected, adopted, and attribute change callback. I remember going over those, but here it is documented in case you want to learn more or experiment yourself and what it does.
And I take my comment back. It looks like it's going to be plenty easy to write bad code with this.
Yeah, it totally is. It's all JavaScript.
No, but what I mean is like you think about how many times React has changed its APIs and added like, well, we use hooks, we use classes, we don't use classes, we don't use hooks, we use server state, we don't use server state, we use client state, we use Redux. Like,
Yep.
this is actually simple, and it's not going to change next week.
Oh, it is not. It is not at all. They might add some stuff, but it is definitely not going to change. And they deliberated over this for many, many years before they made this spec. So, that said, I have to go back to the other screen. Okay, so this is Zest. And I just started with a workflow. This is where Vite came in because I wanted as few tools as possible, and I wanted to have as few requirements to build onto it as possible. So the only dependency is dev dependencies. The actual dependencies are all components in the umbrella package of Zest. So you can include all of them as separate components or libraries or not. This is very much geared towards not being a framework. I don't want to build a framework. None of these components know that they're part of a thing. None of these components care. You could use these components in React or Angular or Vue because they're just HTML elements. And just like your Vue app doesn't know that the input tag is not owned by it, it doesn't know that whatever you want the tag to be isn't owned by it. It's kind of nice. But anyway, we use Vite. Vite is, go ahead.
Yeah, for those of us that are on the back end, what is Vite?
So,
Or V? Or Vitag?
I live in America, so it's Vite to me. You can correct me later if you want, but it's just a workflow. It uses roll up, whatever it does.
What
It's
does it
hidden
do?
from me. I don't care.
English, what does it do?
It allows you to build and preview your front end apps. It will watch all of your files. It will recompile only what it needs to, and then it will reload your browser, as we will see in a moment. And it's a great workflow. And it pairs well with Vitest, which I'm using, and you actually helped me to get this working. Thank you, Caleb, back in the day. And it's great for running all of your Zest tests or whatever else tests you want every time you make a change and save. So it's file watching, it reloads things, it reruns things. It's great. And it's simple, and it's one dependency, and it's just, I love it. In the POC, I had like a Rust thing called Lightmon that you had to download with cargo or run a shell script. I ran bash, all this nonsense, and we just have Vite. It's fine. I have some helper functions for myself, like there's a make a new package that takes this template. Up here? No, that's templates. Again, I don't use VS Code very often. And it just takes the basic package and gives you everything to have a working hello world version with a test of a component. And so you can make new packages pretty easy. Again, this is for me and my workflows. I like it. If you don't like it, that's fine. I don't. You can judge me all you want.
How do you test them? Like, does Happy DOM handle all the Shadow DOM stuff correctly?
I will show you in a moment. But all the components are just kind of there. The simple router doesn't work. Just don't look at this. This is all in flux. It's not for you. But it's a good example. Let's just look at the two-tier menu, because that features very well and prominently in our actual apps. Again, packages, base components, that's the only thing. And base components does not have dependencies. Does not. And they're pretty easy. You run Vitest run or Vitest build or whatever, and this is the entirety of it, and it is pretty ugly. Don't get me wrong. Again, one of the big problems that we're seeing, and we haven't solved yet because we're lazy and focused on other things at the moment, is templating CSS and or HTML is difficult, and we want them separate. So we have a template and a style template separately for every component. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But we have styles. And then for the two-tier menu, we don't have an HTML template. We render it based on a JSON blob that is your config. And this is the render function that just looks at all the things in the config and renders it. And yes, there's a lot of boilerplate. Again, I would like to solve that problem, but I would like to solve that problem in a non-framework way. We just haven't got there yet. Maybe you will beat me to it. I will use your library. You can call it not Zest. It's fine. And then it just renders a menu. And I will show you that menu in a moment. But here are the tests. We have an HTML with 2 of them, because it doesn't matter. You can have multiple, and they're not going to clobber each other, because they're not ID equals app. They're just elements. And then here's the spec. We do render the HTML into there because you needed a document to attach to. And then we just, oh man. And then we're just using Zest and I think JS DOM actually in this. I don't remember. But we can actually look.
I feel like those tooltips in VS Code have gotten
JS
worse
DOM.
recently.
Oh, just popping up all the time.
Yeah, the mouse hover stuff, I've noticed that, and it's driving me insane, because it didn't used to be like popping up on as much stuff, and now it's like, it's a comma, like, and pops up stuff on a comma.
Yeah. I was like 6 months out of date on VS Code on this, so I updated that today, and I just don't do it.
Yes.
No, I want
Yes.
to test.
I've been seeing this a lot, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Like this stuff?
Well, they've got autocomplete in Chrome now too, and it'll autocomplete the wrong thing, and then you can't hit tab or space or enter.
You type in a full URL, press enter, and it goes to the first option.
No, I mean in the dev tools,
Oh.
if you start typing something and say there's like a property dot length, and you're going to type something else, you're going to type dot Lollapalooza and assign a value to it, it's gonna just fill out dot length for you and you don't have any choice.
That's
And then you have to go
unfortunate.
select it and then retype. So, yeah, the autocomplete's getting.
I apologize that I'm using VS Code. I'm so sorry.
Okay, but I have another comment.
Mhm.
If you wanted to highlight your template string styles, there's something on NDN that you can include, and it gives highlighting in VS Code, and it might work for Vim as well, or whatever, so,
I want you to link me that in Discord if you
Sure.
have it handy,
yeah.
because that would be awesome.
So,
I mean, I use it on the Dash stuff, but I've been building similarly vanilla components. And
Yeah.
I include this one little thing that just makes them template strings, and so, yeah. Yeah, yep.
Nice.
And yeah, it just tricks freaking VS Code, and I'm assuming other editors, and they're like, hey, this stuff inside the template string is actually HTML, and highlights it, so,
That'd be nice.
yeah.
I would like that. This is why I want more community involvement in this sort of stuff, because it would be really nice to have somebody or several people or a whole community of people that know things that I don't know sharing this information. Thank you.
So,
Yes.
if you were to go back, you had a thing that had a loop and a loop, and it was basically a string builder, except it was a DOM builder.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
So, did you consider using HTML template strings, template literal strings, rather than doing this? Because this looks very
So-
difficult to read, and it's not going to be very performant, because it's more performant to do insert adjacent HTML than it is to do create element.
Really?
That's the only way that VS Code works.
Yes, I have considered. And again, this is all in flux and is bad, and it's fine.
Wait, hold up. Are you suggesting that setting inner HTML is faster than?
Insert adjacent HTML.
Okay.
Inner HTML is faster. Insert adjacent HTML is fastest.
Oh, also worth noting that like one thing we learned early on was don't just generate all of your elements before attaching to the DOM, and then at the end add the thing to the DOM. In the menu case, we have several sections, hence this two-tier menu, and so we append those sections into itself, and then the thing that is using this will attach itself to the overall DOM, and it's okay-ish. It's also not re-rendering ever, in our case. So we only have to do this once. It might be less performant. This is why we haven't focused on it, because it's not a problem.
Well, I mean,
It's
I guess
not.
if it
It's
doesn't-
not nice.
I mean, if you consider Angular though, Angular had a problem where if you created a list that was more than 10 long, like a drop-down menu, it would start to get slow. And it's because they were, I think, I don't know, never mind. It just, performance is always on my mind whenever I think about DOM elements, because historically it's always been so much worse than you'd think, so much sooner than you'd imagine. Like, I think, okay, if you're approaching 100,000 items, it might start to get slow at that point. But in the DOM, it's like you do 100 items and it's noticeable.
Yay. Okay, good.
Okay, I want to know more about performance. So just writing the raw HTML, like using inner HTML or adjacent HTML, is faster than using the low-level API.
Well, it's not a low-level API, it's an abstraction over the text. It's a string builder that's managing a lot of internal state and then trying to like prepare it to insert into the DOM. if it's inserted into the DOM while you're manipulating it, you may be forcing repaints very, very frequently. So, yeah, the worst possible thing you could do is use the DOM methods on active elements. The next worst thing you can do is use the DOM elements at all. The next best thing you can do is to use inner HTML, and the absolute best thing you can do is to use insert adjacent HTML.
Okay, so when I call create element, behind the scenes, it's converting that into a string.
Well, it is eventually, but it's creating a whole bunch of state to manage DOM elements and their event listening system. And so you're creating something that has all of the representation of the DOM element, whether or not the DOM element is active in the DOM. So any manipulation you do, anything that needs to trigger, anything that's going to cause that element to change or update or need to experience events, all of that plumbing is included from the point that you call create element.
Okay, but if I just use inner HTML, then it doesn't bother to include the stuff that I didn't write in there.
Well, then you're delaying the time at which the DOM elements are created and their event system is created and their plumbing is created and their repainting system is created and their rendering system is created. You're delaying all of that to being created at once for the whole thing, rather than it having to keep track of all of the state for anything that a DOM element should do while you're manipulating it.
Okay, so it's just all about doing it all at once, so that you don't have to, it doesn't have to read you a bunch of these connections that you aren't going to actually use.
Yeah, and the insert adjacent HTML is faster because it will insert in between nodes, so you don't have to create a parent node and then I don't remember exactly how. Insert adjacent, the word adjacent is key. It can insert, you don't have to replace, because the old way was that you'd have to create a parent node and then you'd have to like replace itself, but with adjacent, you can just insert it before or after without having to retemplate the parent.
Also worth remembering that the custom elements have lifecycle methods like connected callback that are only called once you're actually inserted into the DOM. So you can kind of control some of these things. As always, profile, do the things. I'm again not advocating that you use Zest or learn the code. It's just bad. Don't worry about it. But that said, we have the other side of this is we have an event broker. And again, this is just vanilla JavaScript. It's not tied to anything. It doesn't know that it's part of a Zest application. You could use it in addition to whatever else. It doesn't matter. All it is like it just creates some wrapper functions so that I don't have to do all of this weird boilerplate nonsense for custom events. And it will keep track of, hey, how many things actually need to be sent to this event? Or if I fire this event, what does it need to be wrapped in? If I want that like succinctly, all right, just attach it to this detail object thing. I don't worry about that. I just want the payload to go to the things. It will handle that for me. That's all I wanted from it. It reduces the boilerplate. It might not reduce your boilerplate. Your mileage may vary. Again, I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying the browser APIs are nice for firing off a whole ton of events and being event-driven in your apps. And it was really easy to write. Again, this is the cleaned up version, and it doesn't really take very much, and it's only 3 functions. Or yeah, 3 functions.
You're scrolling too fast.
3 functions. Subscribe event, where you subscribe to an event. Unsubscribe event.
Is that what you
I'll leave that as a definition, an exercise for the reader. And then fire event. You will note that this just does the document.dispatch event with a custom event that wraps it in the detail object. Because that is the thing that is required in a custom event. Otherwise, things will break. And then, so I don't have to deal with that. And then on the other side, when I'm subscribed, I only get the data. Because these handlers are all wrapped in a thing that I can't remember. It gets the detail. I'm scrolling very fast because I'm trying to look for it. I can't remember where it is. This might also be like an older version.
There's the handler callback event name eDetail.
Yeah. There we go. Yes. So I just passed the payload to your callback that you registered the event for. It's just a middleman, and it's great.
Okay, so it's just a very light layer to get, basically you're reducing the boilerplate of a custom event.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, okay.
And also, one of the goals of this particular thing was I wanted kind of a central location because like I wanted to be able to see how many things have I registered as event handlers that are part of elements that went away. And so this is a nice centralized kind of store of those events and their event handlers by name, hence the events and subscriber stats. I could get stats on like how many things are there. Again, very early days. We're just building this out and it's very nice so far. So let's show you that because I actually already showed you that.
Did anybody else have questions on that, by the way?
Anybody? We will have plenty of time for discussion and questions, and I can dive deep into any of this after the thing or whatever. But you will notice that there are two menus on here. And that is because the workflow for development and demoing Zest uses Zest for the workflow. So the menu, and again, it's not built out yet, the menu is a Zest two-tier menu. And then it is also displaying all of the components in a list, of which there are two, and one's not here because it's an older version. And one of those components is a menu. So it's dog fooding, and then it's also being run with Vite. So if I make changes to either the configuration or the actual component, it will re-render the whole thing and reload it. So when I'm developing a new component for Zest, all I have to do is run this and start developing. And it's very, very nice as a workflow. All of the things are CI/CD in the background, whatever. That's not really part of this particular talk, but I highly recommend that you automate as much of your workflow as possible. But it's just fire it up and start developing. It's great. Does anybody want to see like the production code we're trying to build with this?
Yes.
Because I'd really like to throw Hinton under the bus for this.
Yes.
Suddenly, this is much more interesting.
Again, I have to keep going. So we're developing an app called Katano. It's process engineering with some AI handlers for steps in that process. It's an app. Just paper over that. It's not important. It's a thing that we're developing in earnest for people to pay for big companies to pay for. And we are using Zest because we've explored a whole bunch of things. We actually have a Vue version of the basic kind of prototype, and we're switching it all over to Zest because it's so much faster to develop in. That said, it is also not to be trusted. This is for us, and it is in flux, and there are already problems. Like, there are things in there that should be singletons that aren't singletons because we haven't done it yet. Like, there's lots of work being done. Don't judge us. Just judge Hinton. Now, this is the index.html. Again, we have a div ID app. We could just make an app component. We will eventually, but Hinton was starting to use Zest, and like he was my guinea pig for how easy is this, and he didn't follow all of my patterns, and that's great. That is perfect. That is exactly what we wanted. But we haven't gone back and done any of the reconciling. We will get there. And then there's a bunch of templates, and we're done. We have now explored all of the starter HTML. We're still using Vite for the workflow. We're still using JS DOM. So sorry. So sorry. I know you want Happy DOM, but it didn't work for me for whatever reason, and I chose JSON, and we're running with it. Hate me all you want.
What are those?
What are what?
Yeah.
Oh, JSDOM and Happy DOM, because Node is a travesty. It doesn't have like an actual DOM, so you need to emulate all of the DOM in Node. Or you have to do something stupid like run Cypress. So we chose the much, much, much less egregious path of just using an emulator of the DOM, and that will handle all of the events and stuff that your browser would. It'll give you like a window object, that sort of thing.
As in for server-side rendering or compiling and transpiling type stuff?
Yeah, it can also do that too, but we don't want to do that. Your mileage may vary. If that's your thing, it's also useful for that, I'm sure.
I just mean, why are you using it at this point?
Oh, it's for tests.
Okay.
It's purely for tests. So our actual like app is this. We have a whole bunch of things. There's nothing sensitive. I know this is being recorded for posterity to make fun of Hinton later. And we have...
That is why we're recording it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's why I signed up for this. We have like the whole setup, and then we just splat the actual page on there, and all the logic for each page is in the page itself. There's a concept called a data registry, because some components you could just like include the amount of data you need in the actual attributes, and that's great. So you can like have like a key equals foo or something, and then that's relevant to the component somehow, and it goes and does its thing, happy day all along. For things that are much larger, like this menu data func, this is just the menu config. The menu, the two-tier menu that we've seen already, is a data component, meaning that it has the plumbing for if it is provided with a data registry name and a data function name. It will go to that data registry, which is just a keeper of functions by name. It's just an object wrapped in register function. And it will say, hey, I am this component, give me my data. And in this case, there's only one, and it just returns a JSON blob. This is where it gets its config. You cannot, well, I mean, you can, but you shouldn't, and you shouldn't advocate for putting this in an HTML attribute. This whole thing should not be in an HTML attribute. I don't feel like that's a controversial statement, but fight me outside, I don't know. And that's how we render the menu. Everything we need to render the menu is there. All the logic is in the component. All the config is here. And it's just in a global registry. And I just put an L there for some reason. And then we'd register elements. And we have authentication stuff. And then we route. We're using... Oh yeah, this is a good example. This is not my router. You may notice that it's a totally different. Well, you probably didn't notice because we scrolled a bunch of things. This is what's it called? What? Navigo. Navigo is a vanilla.js router, and so we just include it, and it doesn't have any other dependencies, and it's nice, and it was really easy. It took, what did Zach take? A half hour to switch over, something like that. He was like, I don't want to use your router, and because it's broken, and he's right, it is broken, and so I'm just going to use this thing, and I was like, go for it, and he did it, and it was great. So we have the routes defined here, and it just puts in the new pages, and they're just components, just normal components, very crazy. You could do all this in HTML rendering as well, we just didn't care. Because they're the same. Render string, new component, whatever. And then we have some helper functions for authentication, and we're done. That's our whole app. Everything else is pages. I can't show you those pages because I can't run it locally because this is not my work machine for this app. But we have a Vue version that I can show you if that was useful. I don't think it is, but maybe you can convince me. I don't know. But the key here is we have developed a number of components in Angular land, and by we I mean Hinton has developed some components in Angular land that are very cool. They're tables that operate much more like Excel spreadsheets than tables. And so like they have key bindings and all that for like I'm just going to navigate with the arrow keys and enter to edit and tab over and all this jazz like you would expect from a spreadsheet, because we're working with business people as our main users for one of our main apps where we started this, and they are used to using Excel. So we just brought that over. And he converted that from Angular to Zest, and what did it take you, like, how long? Because it's just events. Because all of the things that you handle keys are events already. And so converting everything else to just use events to pass data around rather than angular functions passing weird callbacks everywhere was easier and more straightforward.
No,
It was weird.
I don't buy it.
So, does anybody in here watch the Primeagent?
I've seen his stuff.
Right? He's smart, and he actually teaches things that are valuable. He's not just some crap poster.
He is also a crap poster.
Okay, he's a crap poster, but he's not one of those social media people that just puts up junk to get follows. He actually has experience to back his opinions and his...
He's an educational memer.
Yes. Anyway, he put out a video I watched recently where he talked about, like the secret that no one wants to admit is that we should have been using global event buses rather than Redux, rather than, all these other things that people have created to manage state so they can communicate up and down trees and hundreds of thousands of lines of complexity, but you could just do it with a global event bus. And it sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yeah, literally when React originally came out, we looked at the prop passing thing that they built a whole ecosystem for, and those of us of the old ways recognized, man, this looks a lot like Windows 3.0 message passing. Do you think they'll catch up to like Windows 98, Windows XP anytime soon? And they've gone off in a totally different direction. But we were kind of excited, like, oh, app dev in the web could be fun again. But it was kind of crazy to think of back then, and I'm not sure why we ever thought that was a good idea. But it was lovely to some people.
Well, it creates complexity. And when you create complexity, you get lots of bugs.
It does.
Which means
it
that you
does.
need constant updates, which means that you get lots of green squares on your GitHub profile.
Uh-huh. So all of this is serviced by that eventing. The same event broker that I showed you is in here. And we also have, speaking of data management, services.
Oh, no.
We are using the Fetch API. And one of the things you'll notice is like this is all tied to events. Like it doesn't know anything about what's asking for the data. It just knows things are giving me data through events, and I send out changes via events. And everybody that cares, even if it's nobody, gets what they want. And it's very straightforward. And you don't have prop passing. You don't have parents that manage state for their children, unless that's makes sense for that page. I don't know. I'm not your dad. Whatever. I'm his dad. But you can do what makes sense and kind of choose your own adventure, and we do. But the Fetch API is really nice. We can do all sorts of nonsense, and we can do the async thing or not do the async thing. Again, don't judge our code. This is all in flux, and it's just like, get it working, and then we'll fix it. And we just have all of these, and we're talking to third-party servers. I won't show you the auth service because I don't know if there's something sensitive in there or not because security. But we're talking to a third-party auth service with these services. It integrates very nicely. We didn't need like a special SDK or anything like that. It was just easy, and we converted the auth that was in the Vue app to Zest-based app in, I think he took 20 minutes. And it was just really straightforward. Again, I'm not advocating that you use Zest. I'm saying that things can be nice, and you can decide what that means to you. So that said, there's our data state management. And if you want to use local storage here, whatever, if you want to tie it to a server, a database, if you want to do it in Electron or whatever the new hotness is, Tori or whatever, you do you. It's choose your own adventure. It's just JavaScript. You could do it in TypeScript. I won't, but you could do it in TypeScript. Whatever you want.
Couldn't, but earlier I saw TypeScript on the screen.
Yeah, that was in the POC,
I also
remember?
saw that.
Again, that was in the POC. And that's why we're not using TypeScript. Because it was a nightmare. Views are the same like you would expect. We have a home page with a sub page, and it looks exactly like you would expect, except we're extending, other base classes with other helpers. And you just get all this stuff in the abstraction that you want. Building that abstraction is super easy because you're laying it on tops of things that make sense for your app and not what somebody else thinks you need, and also with the kitchen sink that so-and-so needs. It's just your stuff. The entirety of this app, including all of the images and CSS and everything else, is so tiny. It is so tiny. It's constantly in flux, so I'm not going to give you a number. But it is way less than just the React library that doesn't actually do anything for you other than the display, because you still need Redux or Axios or whatever else in there. We don't have any of that. We don't have any of that. The only third-party dependency we have so far is Navigo, and it's just vanilla.js with no other dependencies, and it's less than 100 or 100 lines, something like that.
What is
I think it's like 200. Navigo is just a vanilla.js router.
I was going to ask, what job is, what is Navigo solving beyond just using
Router.
push state, replace state, and path name for routing needs?
Just the router.
What does that
What
mean?
you're saying.
So I could say when the URL is /home/in progress, display thing.
Well, yeah, that's just like path name, push state, replace state.
Well, and also like parameter parsing, things like that. So I don't have to like go to the history API directly. I can kind of wrap that in one function. Again, we were writing our own, but it was like, well, Navigo just already has it.
To parse the path, you just like, you split based on slashes, and you're done, right? I mean,
Yeah, and you can parse HTML with a regex. Zalgo, he comes.
So, Express was based on something, I think it's like path to regex or something.
Yeah.
And when I was trying to find a way to do the router myself and my own stuff, I realized, well, it's MIT path to regex, and you could get all the Express routing by just including that one tiny lib. But if you try to install it, you get all sorts of stuff. I'm like, but there's no dependencies in path to regex.
Yeah.
So technically you could have that type of routing, but yes, I might look into Navigo now, because if I could just
It's very
install it,
simple.
that would be nice.
It's very simple, and I'm not saying everybody should use it. I'm saying we have very simple needs. And if you have more advanced needs, maybe you need something bigger.
So this is like a lighter weight version of the Express routing.
It may even include what I'm talking about. I don't know if it's based on it or not, but
Yeah.
Tests are the same as we would expect, like you would expect them to look like. What else?
yeah. I'll have to check it out. I'm definitely gonna check it out.
Behold our dependencies. It's not very extensive. It's a tiny app. It's a tiny, tiny app. It loads instantaneously, it performs instantaneously, it renders everything as fast as it gets stuff from the network. And I will never have to update it to a new version of whatever thing. There's no like, oh, well, okay, to update to Angular whatever, now you have to convert things to signals. I don't have that problem. And it's very nice, because we hate that problem.
Okay, but let's that might be a little bit of a straw man, because couldn't I just stick with Angular 1.7 and then just, I don't have to update anything either?
I mean, there are other problems like security fixes that, no. You may be making an interesting trade-off there that you don't know.
Also, when Node goes from version 14 to 16 to 18 to 20, it breaks every single time, and then you're forced into either running Node version
But I'm not running Node.
0.7. Well, you are, because you've got V.
Only for the build.
But that's what I'm saying, is like...
Yeah, and I may have to update that. If I ever update the app, I have to update that. Just like I have to convert to ESM modules and...
One thing that's nice though is that you have, if you want to stick to like Angular 14, the community moves on. You stay on the island. Whereas this way, like the MDN is still there. There's always going to be the community support for like how basic JavaScript works.
Yeah.
And so you still have a home
It'd be a cleaner upgrade path versus like having to like focus on like
Yeah, you're not forking essentially.
I guess you're staying within just the JavaScript kind of like base.
And again, I will advocate that you have to make the choice of the trade-offs that work for you. I'm not saying that this is the better way. I'm saying it's my way for our workflow. Yes.
With your insistence on sticking with vanilla JavaScript, aren't you afraid that your website won't be able to be held hostage by a developer who decides to delete his left pad function?
Oh man, you're right. I do need that in my life. Crap. I'll just install left pad manually. It's fine. So okay, so that is all the code that I have to show you. I will show the last slide because we have to. It's so confusing. It's on the right, but it's on the left. Ugh. Okay. Now it's just discussion time, and we can dive into code or talk about whatever spicy questions after the recording's over. I'm here for it all.
What kind of spicy questions are we gonna? Never mind. We'll wait till after the recording.
So I've got a question. It seems like the overall kind of the big idea that you're presenting is that you can use the web platform to just build stuff that's going to change a lot less frequently and be a lot more stable, and maybe be more performant
in some ways.
Dependencies. And there's kind of a whole host of benefits of just using the web instead of using another layer on top of that. And it seems like in kind of modern web development, the mindset is often, I have a problem, let me reach for a third-party tool. And you keep doing that, and you keep collecting, and then you've got no modules that's, 1,000 deep.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up with all this complexity that each individual third-party tool is a minor amount of complexity, but it piles on, and then you kind of end up buried underneath that. In this example here that you're showing, you kind of started fresh, or it sounded like you had a Vue app that you were maybe translating some things over, but you kind of started fresh and had full control of the whole app. Do you have any thoughts on taking something that's like, many of us are working in existing apps that are kind of buried under this complexity of how to dig out of that?
Yes. Okay. So one of the key things in the POC was, or goals of the POC was, I wanted something that I could use in other places. So like I could bring to the place where we primarily work is Angular, but with the exception of React, because React is a special nightmare of its own in all the component things, and you can read it from lit components, you can read it from, it's just all of the things. It's harder to do this in React, but it's not impossible. But you can bring components or these libraries into those and then just start using them, and like you can choose your own adventure. Like one of the key advantages of that data registry that I was talking about, components that need data in order to just launch, in order to just display what they need to display from the get-go, right? They need to go get it from somewhere. That is in the way we've designed it, and I'm not saying you need to design it the same way. In the way we've designed it, it is just a function. If you can provide a function from somewhere that I can call and pass a couple items like the name and like any configuration, whatever, you can define that API, but it's just a function. So it can go talk to a server, it can read local storage, it can call someone on the phone and get a PIN, whatever. That function is completely abstracted, and it doesn't know that it's in an Angular app, it doesn't know that it's on a browser, it doesn't know that it's on a server, anything. It's just a JavaScript function. So building this into existing apps is really easy, and web custom elements specifically will work in Angular, in Vue, in Svelte, in all of these different frameworks. And unless you have something that is super tightly coupled, you can build that as kind of a offshoot of, for lack of a better term, making spots of your mess clean. And so you can do that with components, you can do that with libraries. The event pipe is really quite nice for if you have like I'm mostly familiar with Angular services, so forgive me if I can't translate this to every bespoke data store thing, but as long as it can get its data from somewhere, it can be passed to an event as well. And then if you want that eventing, great. If you want it to call from a function on click, great. It is 100% up to you, and it's compatible with everything. As long as you can handle browser events, you can do whatever. I will caveat that this is not what. So one of the key advantages of a framework, period, whether it's in the web or anywhere else, is you are choosing a workflow. The entirety of the reason that Rails exists is because it is saying this is the way to do this. And if you want to do it some other way, no. And I cannot tell you how many times I've written a Django app or whatever, and I've had to like go do middleware because it's really fighting the way because it was developed for a news organization publishing articles, and it was not developed for a real-time game engine or something. Those use cases still happen, but the advantage of those frameworks is you can find a sea of devs that know the framework and not much else, and they can be very productive, and that is a good thing. That is not a knock. That is not a diss on those developers. We don't have any front-end developers. Hinton, we make fun of for being a front-end developer, but he works on the back end just as much as all of us. He's just the primary front-end guy because he's the most willing to do it. But as much as we make fun of him, we're all just full stack whatever. I just call myself a developer because that's what we didn't have the specialties back in when I started. We can't take advantage of that framework agnosticism to build that. So I don't know what this will look like as far as the actual human dynamics go, but the tech will work. As long as you can bridge the human dynamics of whatever team needs to build the tech into it, you could totally convert. And we were looking at converting. It's a big app, the Angular app at work. It's hundreds of thousands of lines of JavaScript that we've written so far. And we were looking at how long it might take to convert to just a vanilla JavaScript based on Zest kind of thing. We're probably not going to do that, but we wanted to know. And we were thinking it would probably take Hinton like a month and a half to convert the whole thing. That's not nothing. It's not an 8-month project either. So again, I'm not advocating that you use Zest, and I'm not advocating that you do it my way. I'm merely saying that there are options that we have not discussed being available so far, even though they've been available for like 2 or 3 years now, depending on the API you're talking about. And so we can kind of change the game at whatever pace works for you. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And then some?
Yeah, no, thanks.
Yes, Hinton.
So, I'm going to go into this, but I want to share my thoughts as the one consumer of this. It's nice, the simplicity is what's great. So when you do React frameworks, like here, you use a tutorial, you write the code like this, and then the black magic takes over and it comes out like this. And the React or Angular experts are the ones who understand what the black magic is doing. But one of the key moments, like, okay, I type something in, make the change, nothing changed. Nothing was rendered? What part of the render cycle am I missing here? Where by what is there some async thing that it didn't render because I didn't call render. If I don't call render, it doesn't render. It renders when I tell it to. And so there's no the whole put it through the black magic and then it's done. That whole part is just removed, and it's just code does exactly what you tell it to do.
By show of hands, who gets reasonable stack traces from their web framework? I get reasonable stack traces from vanilla JavaScript. I can tell you exactly what line on what file, even though it's all compiled and minified.
Yeah, we don't get generic. There was an error. It's that line.
I mean, the first line on the stack trace is usually useful.
In our Angular app, everything is authservice.ts. Everything.
And, so there's, the downsides to the simplicity, though, like, we're still trying to figure out templating. Like, I even show you, when we did the table, that was, at the time, like, it's all written out as, like, JavaScript calls. Like building HTML with JavaScript, which gives you super fine-grained control, but holy hell, it takes like 15 minutes to write the JavaScript, or it would take 10 seconds to write just a little HTML snippet.
Yeah.
We try and do it more as just like template strings, you don't get the markup, the highlighting, although it sounds like there might be solutions for that.
I just shared it on both Stack.js and directly with Tom.
I'll pass it on Slack.
And I will echo one of the greatest decisions was we do not use TypeScript.
Yeah.
It's just JavaScript. Our evolution with TypeScript was like, for the work project, like, okay, I guess we'll use this, this is cool, types, and like, oh, this is really good, I like this, to like, this is horrible. Like, it keeps telling me it's not gonna work, like, it's JavaScript, that'll work. Like, but I don't know what type it is, like, who cares? You're an object.
Yeah.
It will work.
You just tried out the JS docs?
Yes. We are looking at that and trying to figure out where we would integrate at what point in our journey. Right now we're too in flux to really play with it much, but yes, I like JSDoc. It gives you all and most of the things can actually infer based on where we're going from, because we're all using browser APIs, so that the TypeScript LSP actually can infer like, oh yeah, when you call this, you get that back. So like, I know that you're getting an element node or whatever because you're calling browse or document.create element or whatever. It's okay right as it is out the gate. So your mileage may vary, but we're liking it.
And then and the last thing, the events thing was something on the front end. Was not used to thinking that way. I've done that on back end things, but front end is like, well, this thing happens, and so it gets passed up the chain somewhere, or like some callback needs to. Where is this data going? It's with the events. It's like, thing happens and just shout it in the board. And if someone cares about that, they'll hear it. But like, you don't have to worry about parent-child and like, am I calling this callback in the right place? It's just like, fire this event with this payload, and then that component's done. I don't care what happens after that.
Again, like a normal app in every other not web GUI framework.
So,
There's a term for it, is it like event emitting type of thing?
Event.
I think so.
I don't know.
It's like a message bus that you use for like back.
Yeah.
Just send a message to, I don't care who this is going to, but just put it on the bus.
And all of that's in C in the browser. Like, we didn't write it, and it's very, very powerful, very performant.
Anyway, I tend to not be very trusting of other people's code, so this is good for me, but that's maybe not good for everyone.
I'd like to make a plug, if you wouldn't mind pulling up jswithtypes.com. So this is the presentation that I did, which I'd highly recommend if you want to learn how to do types in JavaScript using the TypeScript checker. And it's very, very tedious to get a file set up correctly. I know that there's been a lot of resurgence this past year in doing types in JavaScript. I don't know if anyone has been able to communicate how you do it. And I can't communicate how you do it either, but what I can do is give you an npm command that when you run npm init, it creates the TypeScript file in the correct way. And the presentation shows how the JS doc maps to the types. And Jojo and I have used this in several projects, and in order to get it to work with all the frameworks, we've had to add the filthiest, wordiest 10 lines of boilerplate to every file, enraged with anger. Grr. But it works. Like, it's so stupid because the frameworks are so asinine. It's like,
Tell us how you really feel.
It's like let my module name equals X type of module and exports, and then you have to do an IFI, and then you have to pass in window and the module, and then at the bottom you have to do if module.exports again, and then you have to assign it again. It's like the dumbest looking thing ever, but it's because like, you know, Vite wants it this way, and Next wants it this way, and Webpack wants it this way, so we have to repeat the same line
This
4
is
times.
if you're writing it, what common
In regular
JS,
JS,
yeah.
and regular JavaScript that just works in browsers, works in Node, doesn't require any transpilation.
Well, if you're using the import syntax or the export syntax, so you're saying export function, blah, 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 and you're exporting functions like that versus module.exports equals, or module.exports is equal to an object, and then you're setting value, like, if you're doing the newer type where you're just exporting your functions and stuff, you don't need that wrapper.
But then you need to have a
But it
transpiler
won't,
to.
yes, and it won't work on older versions of Node past 18, I think. But 18 just supports ESM by default, I'm pretty sure, maybe?
Yeah. I think
Shameless
browsers are
plug
going to
accepted.
catch up within the next 10 years.
Shameless plug accepted. I will watch it. I probably won't do this anytime soon. Because this sounds like a nightmare I don't need in my life right now.
No. Sorry. I said that all the wrong way. The thing that we were talking about was if you want isomorphic code that works in the browser and in Node.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I definitely don't want
If you only
that.
care about it working in the browser, or you only care about it working in Node, you do not have to do that thing. And this is very simple in terms of you run the command, it generates the jsconfig.json. I
Fair enough.
cannot describe to you how to create the jsconfig.json, but I can give you a command that will create it.
Yeah.
Because to describe how to do it is not,
We have to speak in runes, yes.
yeah, but it can generate the file, and then, yeah, so if you want to get type checking in JavaScript,
Fair enough.
JS what will do that for you? JSWT.
Okay. Any other questions that we want on the recording?
Performance. So let's say you have a big, stupid, typical corporate website, right? So tons of elements, a little bit of interactivity. This seems like a case for the virtual DOM, probably, right? Like it would be very difficult for any individual to build a virtual DOM. It's a pretty complex project for an individual to undertake. It's big,
Mhm.
but at the end it abstracts away a bunch of things and gives you more performance for free.
Well,
Do you wish you had a virtual DOM?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
But you, in what use case does a virtual DOM actually give you performance?
The one I described, big stupid corporate web page, tons of elements, so you don't want to like pass them all to the browser repeatedly every time you change the little things that give you a little bit of interactivity.
Global
Not sure
event
you
bus.
have to.
Yeah, with events I can just communicate the changes directly to the thing that needs to change, and it can change itself without changing the rest of the world. Directly.
Would you have to like write code specifically to do that, to like make, write your own template for every page?
I mean, you kind of have to write your own template for every page anyway, but if you're building your components with an event-driven, like again, normal GUI programming just does this, and like we don't have to like re-render everything under the sun all the time. That's what we call game dev, and we avoid that in regular apps. I have done both, and in game dev, you have frame buffers, like you're drawing this every 16 milliseconds, and then you're swapping it out, right? But like in a normal GUI app, you don't need to do that. You only need to change the label on this button or change the text in this text box or whatever. And as long as you don't need to like have the parent widgets draw the child widgets, draw the child widgets, draw the child widgets, there's no reason to have a virtual DOM. So if you're just communicating directly, I just don't have a use case. And again, we're doing this with a replacement for Excel spreadsheets. There's a ton of data already on the page, and they are manipulating it all over the place, and they need updates from like other components elsewhere.
Yeah.
So it's not like, and we're doing that in Angular, so it's not like we're unfamiliar with the concept of big, complicated, lots of components apps. But this greatly simplifies the approach by throwing out all the need to like re-render or prop pass or have like this weird control inversion thing It's just, if that component there needs updates to that cell, like all of them, all of the components can just listen to updates for all of the cells. And then just just filter on like, is this for my ID? No? Okay, I just ignore it. And it's like instantaneous.
Okay, I think you get it.
So I could give you the example I'm thinking of, because it's something I've worked on and still need to work on, is if you think like a cryptocurrency current value, so I'm working with Dash, and if I want what one Dash to USD is, you might be pinging an API, say every second, or maybe every 10 seconds, whatever. But if it doesn't change, you might not want to update, whatever. But, so you've got the one component that might show the value, but let's say you've got your, a list of each different address that has different values, and you want to update all of those. Each of them would just say, add on event listener, or add event listener, and then you have a function that goes, hey, when you get the Dash price update event, I want to trigger this for my component. And so then they never get called until that fetch command to the API triggers, and you could add logic to that if you want, like, hey, is this different from the last value? If it is, go ahead and trigger the event. And then they all update, but it's only updating that specific HTML part, that specific
So
component.
basically, every kind of HTML chunk has like some type of event sort of tied to it.
Yeah, yes, you could do it that way.
Yeah, so everything is connected to everything rather than having to set things up.
Well, so that's what Todd was saying at the first part, where he's like, he registered, 100,000 events or something like that?
Mhm.
And he was able to trigger something that it all did 100,000 events in less than a second. It took a little while to register all of those events, which is what I'm saying, like if you have a list, let's say it's 20 long, it's probably not gonna take that long to register 20. But if you had a list of 100,000, for example, it might take, 20 seconds. But if you do it in a smart way, it won't kill your app like registering those. It'll just register a few and loop through.
And that was the naive way. I'm sure that you could actually do performance improvements there.
Well, so what I've started doing this more and more is I'm no longer listening to events on an individual button. I'm doing what AJ said, is I'm just saying, hey, document.onEventClick. These are the things I'm expecting, and this is where you can go if it's this target type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I've only got one event listener for the entire document, or for that specific event. There might be a way to do it if you really wanted to listen to every single event, but you probably want it limited to click or form submit. And so a lot of what I use is form submit, because a lot of what I'm doing, most of it is happening in the dialogue element, and they're all forms inside these dialogues, because they've done some trickery with the new dialogue element, where if you say, it's either type, so form type dialogue or form method dialogue, I forget what it is. If you do that, it knows it's inside a dialogue and will pass certain values into the dialogue. And so you can do some trickery by listening to just if there's any submit event or if there's any cancel event for a form, I just want to know, and then tell me what the name is. And so I just listen to all the submit or all the cancels, and I go, hey, which form are you? Okay, that's this dialogue, boom, gone. And so exactly like what he's saying, I could have that dialogue, just have an event listener, which I do, like, hey, listen for cancel, or listen for this being pushed out. And, yeah.
And I will respond, caveat against my own presentation, like, that's a lot of architecture thinking that you don't have to do with a framework. Because you just follow the pattern, the framework says, this is the way.
Mm-hmm.
You will update next year, but whatever.
It does seem to me that if I were to put in the effort to have this custom global event system, then that would solve all of the frameworks pretty fast.
Well, data passing, but not necessarily either. Like, there's lots of different patterns to enable. But yeah, I don't have the problem where I have to have a virtual DOM.
Are you worried about
Which is a solution. You just don't have the problem that that's a solution too.
Touche.
So you're worried about, like, with all the event communication about, like collisions? Like, if you have a team with like 10 people,
4.
or like, well,
But-
like, I don't know, it seems like it would be complicated to just like come up, like, I need to, I don't know.
Like having a global namespace for all your events or something.
Like, you just enforce, like, everything must be unique, like, you have the file name, you like randomly generate an ID for each event, or?
So that is a thing. I have a whole rant on how JavaScript cannot be taken seriously because they can't do basics like namespacing, but this is definitely another one of those. There are ways around that. Like you could have, like I have a basic event broker, and you saw it, all of it, and it's not very complex. But you could have a dozen of them and have them with their own names that they prepend to every event that you want. You know, there's ways around that to kind of build it in, and you can see that with all like the module import processing nonsense that we've done for that side of the namespacing problem. Like there are solutions, but you do have to think about it. So I'm not concerned, and if I get to the point where there is a problem, like so-and-so over here has a completely different thing that is calling the same thing, okay, but also at the same time, like, okay, you have 2 events that are named the same thing and have totally different structures. How's your error handling on your components? Like, this isn't formatted correctly, drop it on the floor and move on with your day. There's solutions is my point. And you'll have, it's just trade-offs. You'll have one problem set or another problem set, or both, or none. It's all up to your app and what you need.
So, can I add a comment, by the way? I've talked to you about this, but specifically to the dialogue element.
Sure.
I had tried the web components with dialogues, and there's something janky about that, so fair warning.
Yeah.
I had something to do with the Shadow DOM. I could not unregister events, and so even though like there is a remove event listener,
Mm-hmm.
You'd open up the dialogue, and if you had a form in there, let's say I'm working with cryptocurrency stuff, so I'm like, hey, I want to send a dash to Caleb. And then you go, oh wait, I don't know his address, so you cancel that and close it. And then you open it back up, and then you go, oh wait, was it 1 dash or 1.1? So you cancel it, and you open it back up. And you open it up again, and this time you've got all the information. Well, I found out the removed events weren't removing, so it would try to send 3 dash. And so there's something janky in web components and event listeners. I don't know if you've run into that, but
Yeah, same comment I made to you. JavaScript doesn't have destructors, so there's no surefire way to clean up. There is the disconnected callback when it's removed from the DOM, but that's not necessarily universal. Like in his case, it might not even be in the DOM. I don't know how dialogues work in the browser, but
they use some form of Shadow DOM as well.
yeah.
And I don't know if they did something themselves that that you can't yourself do.
But
Yeah.
if you don't remove an event, when you remove the element, the event listener stays, and whatever JavaScript was associated with that element continues to live.
Mm-hmm.
This is the reason that generally there is a top-level event listener rather than assigning event listeners at the component level. Because if you assign at the component level, every instance of that component you have to somehow deconstruct, and as mentioned, there is not, like we have in Rust or in Zig or in sane languages, a defer or a deinit or a dealloc. There is none of that machinery. So when something drops out of scope, it just stays there and creates memory leaks. And this was one of the problems with jQuery in the early days, was that the jQuery in the early days did that same thing. It attached events onto elements rather than attaching it onto the body. And the one reason you wouldn't want to attach it onto the body is if you have a form event, submit fires once it hits the form, the first form, whereas every other event other than submit does not fire until it hits body. It doesn't fire until it hits body.
Yeah.
So you click a div 1,000 layers deep, and unless you have a specific handler on it, it will go all the way up to body, and then if body doesn't catch it, then it will do the default handler.
Yes. So,
But if you did attach an event listener to that div 1,000 levels deep, and you replaced that every second, you'd have an enormous memory leak.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, because you'd be creating a new JavaScript context. So think of scope. Scope is an object, right? Like we view it as syntax, but in reality, it's an object. It's an object that goes on the heap. So every function's scope goes on the heap. Well, not every function's scope, but for the sake of this argument, every function's scope goes on the heap. So anytime you create a function, any events, anything that's registered inside that scope is on the heap. And if it can't be garbage collected, because event listeners are notorious for not being able to be garbage collected because there's an array, and unless you detach the thing from the array size won't be 0, and as long as the array size isn't 0, that array can't be garbage collected. There are some, I know that at least in Node, there's a couple of tricks like weak references that work on some objects, and I think weak references may be coming to the browser, although that's probably a mistake. What we need instead is like a dinit method or a defer method like Go and Zig and Rust all have.
There's weak map and weak set.
Yeah, okay, so there's weak map and weak set, which you could use those inside of a custom component for an event handler, and if the parent gets garbage collected, then it should let the children get garbage collected.
Could this just be built into frameworks, or is there some trade-off to doing this automatically? Like, would it be unperformant to find the event listener to attach it?
Well, all the frameworks can do that because they have a way, and as long as you follow the way, they can base their assumptions based on that way. So cleanup can happen. It's the exact same way that I'm doing it. There's a cleanup function on the base component, so if you have anything you need to do, you can put it in the cleanup, and if it's in like a component, it can be called from the disconnected callback, so that when it's removed from the DOM, it will call that. And then I can unregister it or whatever. But in like other things that are not components, I still need to like make sure that I manage the life cycle of that thing and call up the cleanup function.
It sounds like a real gotcha. Like, it makes me wonder if there are 50 other things that I might not know about.
Welcome to JavaScript in the browser.
Well, this is one thing. I'll say it because I must say it. This is what makes me angry about web development, is that instead of solving problems that are actually important and that would make a difference, people bicker about what freaking character to use for the new arrow syntax, or how to do something that literally we've been able to do for the past 15 years, or like the bickering about a new comment syntax, something that solves no problem whatsoever. And of course, me griping about it doesn't do anything. It's just, it's therapy for me. That's why. But
AJ is also an old man shouting at the sky.
yeah, but this is a problem that's actually needs solving, and it needs a fundamental change in JavaScript to be solved, because we need a dinit, a defer. We need some way to provide cleanup, because otherwise you have to have a wrapper function on your remove, and if you don't have a wrapper function on your remove, then you're SOL. And the frameworks do provide that, they just don't necessarily provide it in an intuitive way, and so then you still end up fighting against it, not knowing it, because if you need to do something that the framework does, like, so for example, he's talking about, I can just use fetch and I can use that anywhere. Well, if you're in React, depending on which state management system you're using out of the 15 million that they've had over the last 5-7 years, and same thing with Angular, actually. if the event system doesn't know about your thing, you just do a fetch, and it's not tied in through the framework, then it can't update the data because it doesn't know the data changed, it can't propagate it. Or if you create something in a web component in React, and he was talking about all the hoops you have to jump through to get web components to work in React, whatever. But that's the same problem, right? If you use it in React and React doesn't know about it, then React can't do the right thing with it. And that's true for most of the frameworks. Very few of the frameworks work with JavaScript and HTML.
Yeah. So ideally JavaScript would be better. But second best, perhaps someone could make just the dumbest possible framework that just solves the gotchas for you.
Not a framework.
Components.
It needs to be libraries,
Okay.
like what he showed, right?
Yeah, I was going to say a finished version of Zest that's not specialized.
Again, you're welcome to wade into that nightmare if you want. I will talk about PRs or whatever.
You can also just write bad code. Like it's.
But how many gotchas could I not?
But there's a lot of gotchas, and you can just live with them. You can live with memory leaks, right?
Yeah.
As soon as you close the browser tab, then it's you kind of got a fail safe there, right? And
This is
a lot of
literally
times-
why we haven't solved the problem.
Yeah, and it's fine. Though.
Yeah.
In most every case, it's totally fine because most people's PCs have more than enough memory, and they're not living, keeping your webpage open for.
Look, this isn't a Microsoft meetup.
but my point is that you don't have to solve all the problems, right? To be effective and to do things that are meaningful and useful, you don't have to spend all your time solving all these problems. Sometimes it's okay to live with them.
Bad code solves business goals.
I've had a memory leak in
Imagine
an app
if you
since
used our
2016
works.
that I just don't fix. Because so I have had that app since 2016. It has a memory leak. It crashes I run it 24/7 in my browser, and it crashes probably every 3 days. And I haven't fixed it because I just don't care enough to avoid clicking reload.
And guess what? Frameworks don't solve memory leaks.
Well, they don't, but so React has a very strange life cycle. If you were familiar with JavaScript and HTML, it's mind-blowing, right? Like, how the heck, but if you follow the React way, it will clean up your components. If you follow
Maybe
the
not.
patterns of use, state, and all of that, it's doing a bunch of side channel stuff, right?
Pretty
Like
much
it's-
just use state for using it, right?
Okay.
Go.
So, at my last, full-time job, I was doing a lot of React, and we were just shifting. Use hooks was just becoming the thing, so we were still shifting from class components. And those class components, I kept having to fix because I know JavaScript, and I would fix them. And then the guys, right out of boot camp, would come in and go, well, that's not the React way, and they would fix the components. And then all the memory leaks came back. And so you can have a framework and have memory leaks. It does not solve. You can do things the framework way, and you can have memory leaks. It does not solve that problem.
Okay, agreed. I was just thinking in terms of component lifecycle. React does clean up its components on its own.
Yeah.
It's just completely unintuitive and requires a very, very low-level understanding of the browser and React to know whether or not it's actually working.
Or an understanding of JavaScript. So, learn JavaScript.
Well, what I mean is learning JavaScript won't help
Or
you
don't.
understand React.
Save your sanity.
Well, it seems like it should be very easy for it to do the job. Whenever you unmount a component through React, it should do that job.
So I will admittedly say I like the use hook style better, and I think things got better when they started shifting away from the class components.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, the class component and the life cycles just bred memory leaks,
Yeah.
and it solved a lot.
Yeah, so when we talk about React moving from class components to hooks, it's more like React was one framework, and then they invented a new framework that was also called React. So
Which happened to look more like normal JavaScript.
Oh.
That was a tangent. Yes.
Actually, when I was sarcastically making the comment about about UPad or left pad.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when that particular event happened, and a lot of websites crashed because the developer got angry that he wasn't getting paid for his repositories.
Mm-hmm. And he removed all of his repositories.
Yeah, it's kind of sparked a debate as to why everyone's doing so many dependencies on so many little things in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a certain level of complexity that's kind of that I suspect doesn't really need to be there.
Yes.
So it doesn't really need to be there, but I think I have the impression that the various creators of these frameworks have some sort of sense of that there's a problem with JavaScript that they're trying to solve, but they don't really know what it is.
Oh yeah.
Which is why you get things like Angular and then Angular 2, which makes everything Angular.
Mm-hmm.
And from the sense of it, I don't have much experience with React, but that's why you get the shift in React and so forth.
At least Vue had the decency to call it Vue 2 and Vue 3.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's a growing issue. Any other questions we want recorded?
Oh, I didn't realize we were still recording.
I haven't been informed that we're not, so.
I can cancel the recording now. My anger, my wrath has been made known. Let me see if we had any more comments from the chat.
I can answer questions from chat too.
Develop it. Develop it. Oh, develop it.
Yeah.
Develop it. There's a GitHub repository called Develop It /HTM. This was maybe half an hour ago, so maybe it's not relevant anymore. And then since destructors were mentioned, is this thing similar? Proposal for explicit resource management. No, that one is so bad. That is exactly what we do not need. We do not need explicit resource management.
We're getting spicy on the recording.
Okay, so I'm going to bring these into the Discord and then let you field them as you wish. So, whoops. There's the one. Where'd it go? Okay, here's this one. That was the one that and this is our very own Kremet here.
Hello.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Wait, what? Did it say my name is Kremet on there?
Yeah, it says Kremet.
Oh. I should say Caleb.
Well, yeah, we have this problem with you. Whenever we try to at you, it like changes every day. It's like
stop changing your name.
No, I don't think he's changing it. I think that depending on the way you access it, Discord shows him differently.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, I'll go ahead and turn off the recording. People on the internet, this is your final 20-second warning. And it's really only 5-second warning because by the time you hear me say 20-second warning, you only have 5 seconds before. So you basically have no time. Your time's out. Bye people of the internet.
You have no time.
Thank you for joining us. Like, sub, follow if you want to. Let the one who guide you.
If you're the old line.
I think that was longer than 20 seconds.